Well, hello and welcome to our podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Kumar, and today we're going to be talking about a new course that I've created. It is called Managing Emotions, Perceptions, and Biases in Procurement Negotiations. See, procurement simply means buying in the professional sense. And so we're talking about managing your emotions, perceptions, and biases for the best outcomes when you're buying things. And I have my partner here with me, Jeff Hicks, today to discuss the new course. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas, how are you? Certainly glad to be with you today.
Thank you very much. So, Jeff, it's my pleasure to have had an esteemed sales professional as yourself be the first person to go through the course. And so today I want to take some time to have a casual conversation with you about elements of the course and see what your thoughts are. To begin with, I'll just give a brief outline of what the course is about. Okay. So it's a 6-chapter course. It starts with a little bit of theory. It goes into psychoanalytic theory. I know it sounds a little technical, but basically it just talks about the conscious and the unconscious mind. And then we then take that theory and relate it to the concept of self-constructs in identity. So we talk about the core self-construct, the defensive self-construct, and the superficial self-constructs. And we'll talk more about that and what that is. Then we talk about managing the actual skill sets in managing emotions in negotiations. Chapter 4 looks at cognitive biases. These are errors of judgment in that we make as we try to make decisions. In chapter 5, we talked about psychological sales manipulation techniques. And then in chapter 6, we talk about the how, self-awareness strategies that we use to manage our emotions in negotiations. Okay. So I think for today, we will probably just go through 3 chapters. So we'll go through chapter 2, talk about the core, defensive, and superficial self-construct. We'll talk about chapter 5, maybe, the sales manipulation techniques. And then we'll also talk about the self-awareness strategies, chapter 6.
That sounds good. Look forward to it.
Okay, so just as a preface to the course, the core self-construct, that refers to, as the name implies, your inner self. So I always tell this story, the analogy of my 3 self-constructs. So I'm Thomas in my former roles, so at work, in my studies or whatever. I'm Tommy in my sort of alter ego kind of defensive role, and then my authentic self I identify as Tom. So I see the need to create this conscious identification of your constructs, because I think it helps create a sort of conscious awareness of your decision making in different circumstances, because I think there's a very, very important need to be able to separate the roles you play from your core, where your emotions and your feelings generate from.
Understood.
And as well as managing your ego, so to speak, which we call the defensive self-construct, in sort of regulating your responsibilities and your feelings. So that's the general idea. We're friends, so we've had a lot of discussions about this.
Yes, we have.
And I've talked to you about how I've had personal struggles in sort of separating my Thomas superficial character from Tom, my core. How have you dealt with this? You've sort of given me a slightly different perspective. How have you dealt with this sort of theory of managing your self-construct?
It probably stems from just being honest and authentic. I think when we're in those business situations, we're clearly dealing with people in their superficial construct, the image they want to promote or convey to represent what that position is to them and to their company. And so as I engage people, it starts out as a very, just respectful relationship. And so I'm trying to identify some of those behaviors that you describe, and certainly not to the depth of the level that you've built the course around. I'd say largely it's their superficial personality that I'm engaged with. And what's curious to me is, of course, I'm always looking for buying clues or at least agreement on the path we're going. And so I guess one thing I'd kind of ask of you is, these kind of deep subconscious feelings, thoughts, ideas that we have, how do they convey themselves, or how do they appear by the person in either their behavior or maybe even physical gestures?
That's a good question, because in the course, the self constructs are modeled out of the iceberg analogy of psychoanalytic theory, and if you look at that, we'll try to put an image up on the screen. But if you look at that, it shows that the core level, which is sort of synonymous with what Sigmund Freud calls the id, the id, ego, and superego. The id is fully submerged in your unconscious mind. Okay. So my core, where my feelings are fully submerged in my unconscious mind. So when using your example, if you as a salesman are trying to sell to me, my superficial self, Thomas, what you're dealing with is Thomas Kamara, the director of administration. Okay? So at that superficial level, we're going to be having our dialogue and what have you. But subconsciously, there are emotional triggers that stem from my core, which I call Tom, my core, and that is an African kid. That is an African kid from Sierra Leone, West Africa, who has a lot of insecurities. And so if at any point you were to tap into any one of those, it would trigger emotions, and in that dialogue, in the negotiation, once those emotions are triggered, they will subconsciously rise to the surface, and it will create some sort of resistance in my negotiation stance. It would create, subconscious biases. And I don't know if you as the sales professional will see signs of those.
And, I think what I'm always trying to establish with customers, be it in the first meeting or, 10 meetings down the road with an established client, is that level of trust.
Okay.
I want to gain their trust by being a strong technical advisor. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if maybe I concede a point or allow for them to get a small win, that's still part of the negotiating process, but again doesn't mean I'm getting stepped on or trampled on. I think that will start to build some trust between us together, and even the maybe less defensive mechanisms come through, they become more forthcoming, and I think the dialogue and the conversation elevates in a positive way. Could that be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good point that you've brought up there, because I think not only do I have negative references within my core, I also have positive references. So if you touch on any of those, then yes, you trigger some sort of positive emotion, and we start building rapport. And I think from the sales rep's point of view, that's where the connection would start.
And certainly there's going to be people, okay, what do you want? What are you here for? It's bottom line. Let's get down to it. And There's no chit chat. There's no, how's your family? How was your last trip or anything like that? So, they've set the ground rules on what the conversation is going to be and what it's going to consist of. And with those, you have to respect that. And it could be time. It could be other issues going on in their facility. But again, recognizing that quickly, and if it's let's get this to the point and see what we're talking about here, then that's your responsibility as a salesperson. But I think most people generally, they want to have a little get to know you and see, who's this person sitting across from me, and can I build some sort of trustworthy relationship here. So I don't know if I'm trying to endear myself to them, but I just want them to know it's not solely my interest. And I know we're going to talk about this later about salesmen's, how they try and get things done and manipulate people. That might work to some level, but for established, long-running relationships, I don't think those tactics survive. And so I'm always trying to bring them along with me and work toward a mutually beneficial outcome.
I think that's a very good point. Because I think so. Here we are. Let's set the scene. You're a sales guy. I'm a buyer. I'm coming into this negotiation, whether consciously or not, with certain reservations. We are in a capitalist society. Let's be clear about this. I mean, your goal is to maximize sales because the goal of your organization is to maximize profit. I know that. And I have already built, whether consciously or otherwise, I've already built some defenses in anticipating that you will try as best as possible to capitalize on any opportunity, including my flaws, my subconscious flaws. You will try to capitalize on any opportunity to sort of maximize whatever sales opportunity you can, including overselling me. So I'm coming into this with apprehension that my defensive walls have built anyway, and these are coming from the insecurities that I have at my core level.
Understand?
Right? So and they don't have to be conscious. They're within me. And so at the superficial level, as much as I'm creating this sort of emotional distance between us, it's really reflecting my insecurities. And so I'm building this wall. If you are able to develop a sort of authentic rapport with me that goes to, there's a gauge within my core that is sensing the level of authenticity in the dialogue. And if you're able to build a rapport with me that sort of touches on that, then I think you start breaking the defensive walls.
And I think too, and we were talking about this the other day, in today's sales cycle, so I've been in technical industrial sales for over 30 years.
Okay.
And good experience with a lot of different industries, from food and beverage to semicon to pharma to biotech, and so I've engaged a lot of different people with different goals, different agendas, and certainly a wide range of personalities. And in those cases, I don't know if I just ignore or just don't expect those, that core to come out and be part of their decision making.
Yes.
Because what sales courses I've attended now, most buyers, procurement managers, they're maybe 70%, 80% into their buying and decision-making cycle by the time they engage a salesperson such as me. So they've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 candidates pretty well. So I walk in with some credibility because they've researched me and or my company and have some understanding of what our capabilities are. So, there's some level of acceptance there, but there's still that prove it stage that you got to, okay, is this what they're all about? So, it kind of puts us in a favorable position, but then I too, just as you said, I have goals, I have profit margins, sales numbers I'm expected to achieve year in and year out. And, I have to measure that versus what is the overall value of the business relationship. And that never seems to succeed if one side wins decisively over the other. It might be for the temporary sale, maybe I get the first big job, but when somebody goes back and they're going to engage another organization doing similar things and pretty much say, this guy screwed me, well, they're not going to come back the next time. So I try and operate with that in mind, looking for the long-term benefit, the long-term relationship, because that's how we all sustain sales.
Absolutely. So that's interesting because there's a school of thought that suggests that people buy not because of how amazing your product is. They buy because of how you make them feel.
Thomas, they buy from people they like. It's as simple as that.
Exactly.
You could be technically savvy, speaking all, but just like, we hang out with people we like, we buy from people we like.
Okay.
And I certainly understand your point. We're in this superficial self with goals and outlines that our business, our organization tells us to achieve. But I think that ultimate decision making, and have no idea what the percentage is, people feel better about themselves when they're purchasing from somebody they like or trust, as I said earlier.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that because I would selfishly want to say it sort of proves my theory, because buying from who you like is an expression of emotion.
Yes.
And so ultimately it comes back down to tapping into that core emotion of trust, of sincerity, or even if it's just a perception of it, but it's a good feeling. I have an encounter with you, I'm left with a sort of good feeling, and so I will respond, right? Now, what happens when I'm all emotional and not aware of it? Okay, this is not your problem. This is my problem, and me going back and having to explain what decision I've made in this buying situation. I have to go back and explain objectively what decisions I've made.
So let me interrupt you there, just because this becomes very important in my line of work, especially when we're dealing with these large corporate companies. And sometimes I deal with a lot of industrial manufacturing plants. So a company has multiple plants throughout the country. Maybe here in Southern California, we're working on a project for them, but that could have application at these other facilities. And so what we're being tasked to do is provide them the ROI, the return on investment. So essentially making the case for them to take to their higher ups. Of course, best meeting is when you're dealing with the owner, what we call the EBI, the big decision maker. He's the guy that's going to sign the check.
Yes.
There's always one person in every company, and we all know that.
Yes.
There could be a vote, but somebody makes the final decision. And so I'm often asked, as we put proposals together, what is my return? What's my initial cost? When do we expect to see it paid back for over time? Is that 6 months, 12 months, whatever? And it's almost like they're putting that burden, not even a burden, but just the task on us to prove it. Show me why this is going to bring value to our organization. And I think they can feel more confident when they go back to their management team or their boss.
I think that's a good point, because I think that need for validation, right? That need to justify whatever decision you've made, and the confidence that comes with it is important. But let me throw a curveball.
Okay.
I work for a government entity.
Got it.
And unlike the private sector, in the private sector, you start with zero, you sell a certain amount, and depending on how good a job you do in maximizing sales and keeping your costs down, you have some sort of a profit margin. I work for a government entity where it's sort of the opposite. You start with a budget and you spend all the way down to zero. And what we strive for is something called net social benefit. So we're trying to help the community in some way, and we have to sort of put some value to that. Now, the ambiguous nature of this net social value is something that then creates an opportunity for almost something I'm going to label opportunity cost neglect. And what that means is, you're just talking about profit margin. We have a profit margin of 5%. I could go back to my bosses and they would say, if I was in the private sector, they would say, hey, you know what? You probably could have negotiated a lower cost and our margin could have gone up 0.5%. Go try that. In the public sector, there isn't such a thing. And so what happens is decision making tends to then be subjective in a certain way, relatively speaking. And so it becomes more about how I feel about the situation and how confident I feel in going back and telling a story.
Right.
So in that situation where you're now dealing with a buyer who is not necessarily looking for a quantifiable return on investment, they're just looking for a story. How do you deal with that situation as opposed to?
Yeah, and I mean, we certainly deal with some government agencies, municipalities, waterworks, water treatment. That's kind of a big category that most cities or municipalities govern over. And it's realizing what the limits are of the negotiation. And I think that's something we all enter into. I got flexibility here. Everything's negotiable. We know that. But just how far are we willing to go? And so if somebody's coming from that point and this is what we have to achieve or get out of this project, or this is our budget, that's the limit. Again, I can build credibility by saying no. We can't achieve that with what you're asking, given the scope, the time frame of the project, and what you're trying to accomplish. That simply doesn't fit the system that we're offering, let's say. So I have to be aware of what my negotiating floor is. Have some anticipation or idea of what their expectations are, because anytime you walk in blind, I mean, nobody would do that in a professional selling situation anymore. Everybody goes in having done their homework these days. So you better be prepared, or you're going to get tore up. So I guess I have to know what our company is willing to do, and respect that person's what they've been given from their company on what they're supposed to achieve, and sometimes there's not a match, and just recognizing that, being open and honest about it. I don't have to go into a lot of detail, but explain our position, and I'm sorry if that doesn't meet your requirements, and you have some maybe even some fairly stringent requirements that we haven't seen in other similar agencies. So I'm not afraid to provide an example saying, this worked for this group, even in the public sector, and it could be something you might want to reconsider. Will it be? I have no idea. That's entirely up to them. But when you've had a fair amount of experience, you develop that level of confidence, knowing when you can maybe push back a little more than you normally would in other situations. So I guess I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but well, it does in a way, and I'm going to use this as a segue to get onto chapter 5. Okay. Chapter 5 is the sales manipulation techniques. Okay. I've never done that, Thomas. Never. Absolutely not. How dare you accuse me? Absolutely not. Okay. There's not a salesman that I know that's ever done any such thing. But however, let me since this is a self-awareness course for optimum decision making, let me throw this at you. You just very well sort of articulated a scenario where it's possible that I, as the government buyer, am looking for a solution that your company cannot provide us. And so you said, you'll be happy to say, this is not something that we could do. Given that this is a self-awareness course, how does that, as Jeff, the salesman, how does that sit within the psyche of Jeff in a superficial role as a salesman, walking away from a sales and having to deal with that, knowing the financial consequences that come with that? Yeah, I mean, and it's a hit. It's a personal loss. I mean, every meeting I go into, I go in with the expectation of getting to a mutually beneficial outcome.
Yes.
In some cases, it's going to maybe favor me a little bit more. In some cases, it's going to favor the customer or the business a little bit more. That's just the balance we get over years of dealings and project opportunities. I think it only hurts bad when I've been found out that I didn't do my homework well enough. If I didn't know, I mean, there's rules and regulations on everything these days. And Jeff, how come you didn't know this OSHA standard was going to be required for us to move forward with your company? Things such as that. So, and those can change, and you might not be as familiar with them on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So, I probably feel more disappointed when I'm, called on something that I should have known going into the meeting. Not being able to get the sale every time, it's not, darn, I should have gone lower just to get that. I still got to stay within the parameters of what our company wants to do. And back to your original point, this is a capitalist society, so we're all in here. I mean, we're expected to do 10% growth year over year. Go figure it out. Forget about the economy. Forget about the customers. Forget about what's going on in the other parts of the world. This is the expectation our company has. Is it achievable in every meeting and every encounter? Absolutely not. So I temper myself by just really, okay, this isn't the right time. It's all often about time and place. So saying no now might mean a yes 6, 9, 12 months from now. So I'm prepared to accept that and take it as a short-term loss possibly, but something that I'll keep tabs on and hope to revisit at another time, maybe when we're both in different situations.
Okay. I respect that, and I wish every salesman was Jeff Hicks, but unfortunately every salesman is not Jeff Hicks. So let's say there's a younger Jeff Hicks sitting there, okay? And I specifically say a younger Jeff Hicks to sort of trigger those core feelings that we're talking about. You're in an industry, you're the elder statesman, you're experienced, you know what you're doing, and all of that. And then you have a younger breed coming through, and they're all about the numbers. They see the numbers on the board. That's what they want, right? And addressing the elephant in the room, the sales manipulation technique. And a younger guy thinks, you know what? I could use some, nothing nefarious, but just some manipulation techniques here, social proof, for example. Hey, I'm the buyer. Hey, Thomas, you do realize that this is something that the city of LA is already looking into. You do realize that the city of Orange is looking into this. And all of a sudden, that then puts me in a situation psychologically. I'm thinking, oh, fear of missing out. Oh, and then all of a sudden now, psychologically or subconsciously, I'm second guessing myself. Is there something I need to know? Should I have been on top of this? And that guy now sees an opportunity to make a sale where the elder statesman decided, maybe next time.
I mean,
how do you live with yourself? How do you then balance the superficial self-construct and your core, knowing that that is a possibility?
So, younger, and we're all familiar with bait and switch techniques.
Yes.
Okay, if I can get the immediate win now, whatever it takes, we can make it up later. And, the most egregious sales technique I've known is, okay, we're going to offer it for nothing, and 6 months from now the price goes up or the terms change.
Yes.
Something about the agreement changes drastically. And that's when, credibility ebbs or goes away altogether, and you've lost any sort of trust or credibility that you think you might have built up. So, yeah, I had those feelings early on. I got to get it, whatever it takes, and some of those might be, outside of fair parameters, let's say, and even, I wouldn't call it deception, but not telling the whole truth. Let's look at it that way. And so, there just becomes an obligation with that over the time, because today there's just too much information out there. Sooner or later you're going to be found out, right? I can try and hide it and pretend it's something that it's not, but that quest to get every big sale, to say I got over on you. That guy was a dope. He didn't know how to negotiate, and I won this easily. What would have been some sort of self-satisfaction and even aggrandizement back then that I sought and wanted to achieve. Again, over experience and time, most of us grow comfortable in our roles, and how do I make sure that any person I engage, be it in business, socially, or just matter of circumstance, how do I make sure there's some positive outcome for both of us? And so that was certainly in my 20s to 30s, maybe even early 40s. That might have been my drive and motivating factor, but outcomes seem to be more favorable now when there's a long-term result and there's an established relationship, because I think that's what most of us find. We want those longer lasting relationships, and I would prefer people, hey, Jeff, they just call me out of nowhere because they know they're going to get treated the right way, and I think that's the best I can do for our clientele and for our customers.
Well, you certainly sound like a nice guy that I would want to buy from, but I mean, seriously though, what I'm sensing from you is someone who seems reconciled in going back to what we started off with, the conversation that you and I had in the past. It sounds to me like you give me the indication of someone who's reconciled in their superficial role. So you, Jeff, as the salesman, and
so I don't think it's too different.
Yes.
Those roles. I mean, we all have the image or the air that we're trying to convey, but
right.
I don't think those are too drastically different in how I am and how I deal with professional situations.
I really admire that. That's the and let's then use that as a segue into the self-awareness strategies, because and before I do that, I'll tell you my struggles and how far apart those roles are for me today. And I've shared this with you before, and I've said that my goal is to bring them closer together, recognizing that there will be a need for separation. There is a need for separation. You have to maintain professionalism. You have to maintain objectivity at a parental level, spousal level, friendship, whatever, from your feelings. But I tell you the story about my background. Okay, so I was born in England, in Newcastle, but I left and my parents went back to Africa when I was very, very young. So my formative years were all in Sierra Leone, West Africa. So that's the core of who I am cognitively, and that is what I call Tom, right? Then I went back to England at age 16 and sort of grew up then in the north of England, in a very blue-collar town. But in that town, there were probably only about, I don't know, maybe 10 black kids my age, right? And so I stood out. And most of the people around town, their perception of a black person at the time, this is not a racial thing, this is more an identity thing. So their perception of a black person at the time was some stereotypical view of some character on television, right? This is the guy who can dance, this is the guy who can play ball, this is the guy who can, and some of the other negative stereotypes that are associated with that as well.
Right.
And so nobody in that town had ever heard of Sierra Leone. There were some people who actually thought Africa was a country, let alone, So and so their expectation, the social expectations that were placed on me were of some character, right? And so I sort of assimilated that, and in that I developed into what I call the Tommy character to fit in, right? And then I realized that at some point in time that I had to conform more to society and adopt the Thomas role so that I can get a job. So I can go to school, get a job, be responsible, And so for me, that was the sort of genesis of those three self constructs. So this is just my story, but you could take the kid from Ohio, and the same things would apply.
Well, so yeah, and just to share a little bit about my background. I mean, I'm the product of two Midwestern farm kids. Grew up in southeastern Kansas on farms, and so work ethic was beat into them both at an early age, and that certainly got translated to me. But we moved out to Southern California, Riverside specifically, when I was very young, 4 or 5 years old. And I think this is really what helped shape and form me, because Riverside's always been a very diverse community. I certainly don't want to get into too many social discussions and pretend that I know what each group or how we interact. But as a kid growing up, I think I was naive to the fact, because we had black kids, we had Latino kids, we had Asian kids. We just all mixed. And the great connector for me was sports. I mean, sports doesn't care who you are, what you look like. It cares how good you are and how well you play. And that's all we cared about. I mean, if you're playing sports, I just cared, I don't care what you look like. Can you make a basket? Can you run the ball? Can you help us win? That's probably how I measured people on their, I hate to say it, value, but that was important to me because I love playing sports. So growing up, I engaged a lot of different people with different backgrounds and whatever. I mean, a whole range of different experiences that I really think shaped me and helped form me into the sales professional that I've become. And so I wasn't pigeonholed, of course. White, middle class, and folks are been together. I had a very fortunate and favorable upbringing, so I don't deny that for a minute. But again, where I grew up, it was open culturally. We just didn't have the divisions that we seem to have today. And I don't want to get off on another topic, but it just exposed me to more, I think, than maybe a lot of people got in their upbringing.
So the cultural element is just one facet of it. But let's say this is all hypothetical. Jeff, from the Midwest. There's Jeff, from a modest family who then transcends the professional aspiration that his parents had for him, and really made it all the way up, right? But Jeff the kid is a blue collar kid, and all of a sudden Jeff Hicks, the vice president of sales, is now going to Germany to meet with the president of the company and operating at that level. How is Jeff Hicks, VP, able to separate from or bring together the emotions of Jeff the kid?
So okay, that's a much bigger chasm to negotiate or reconcile, as you said, because whether we all have it, I mean, certainly there's doubts. I don't belong here. I don't deserve this. I didn't earn that. I don't try and, I guess, elevate myself to the title. And that's where just trying to be mostly that core, I mean, the tenets of what that young kid was, learned and taught. There's always going to be frailties there. There's always going to be uncertainty. And, one misstep and we can be our own worst enemies and just decry ourselves for what we've done and how we should have done better. I mean, I guess that's probably what I find myself is just going back, trying to review situations, engaging in these sales discussions. Could I have done something better? Should I have said something differently? But I guess I try not to allow myself to rise to that title or have the title identify me. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Can I interrupt?
Sure.
How do you try?
I'm not Jeff Hicks, field sales engineer. I'm Jeff. I'd like to introduce myself as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Okay.
That kind of brings the level down.
Yes.
So there's no, again, we're not trying to out-level each other or, show that my capabilities are any better. I want to establish a common ground. And so I want to see eye to eye. I want to engage people in the level of conversation that we have. And, as you develop those relationships, the personalities come out a little bit more, the personal stuff that I'm willing to share, and maybe they are as well. I try and move to that quickly and just avoid being identified as a title. I don't know, we want to categorize everything today, and how do I blend? How do I fit in the gray and not in the the stark black or white? That's what I'm trying to achieve, I guess.
So I know you personally, and I know you're a modest guy, but even you have to be honest and admit that Jeff Hicks, Vice President of Sales XYZ, is quite impressive and can open some doors, right? Recognizing that, so you're accepting that and you're using it as a tool, as a resource to open some doors, because it brings credibility, and it's earned credibility, right? But there's still the kid. There's still the unsure kid. And that's what I'm asking. How do you reconcile those?
I don't think about it that much, and I just wonder if it's been long enough now that the memories of the kid are just that, something long ago that I was, as we all evolve and hopefully improve and just become better people in general. Yes, I certainly have an air of confidence. I mean, I will jokingly make it very clear, especially with family and people I engage, and they're going to take it in good humor. But I just think one of the a couple of the worst traits we can have is that just that feeling of superiority, the arrogance where I'm telling you how it should be. Thomas, this is the decision you need to make. If you don't buy from us, you're going to regret it, and you might get fired. Yeah. So I would never attempt to come across in that way. I just don't. I guess I don't stay in contact or feel that little kid as much as I may have 10, 12, 15 years ago. I don't want to say it's suppressed, but it doesn't, and again, I don't want to get into conscious and subconscious. Maybe subconsciously it's there, but in my conscious mind, decision-making, conversations, it doesn't seem like it comes up, so I'm not having to live in this maybe higher level professional position versus the scared young kid that knew his frailties and
So because I know you, I'm gonna challenge that a little bit.
Okay.
Only because I know there's more to that story than just a simple the young kid and all the fears and all the frailties are there. They're in the unconscious, in the subconscious. So we're not supposed to be walking around thinking about our fears and all of that. And I think age and experience and some work, which is what I want to get into, would get you to that level where you can operate. I'm going to flip it on you slightly, and then we get into the part that I really want to talk about, which is what got you to this point, which is something I know about because I know you personally. Jeff Hicks, VP, is at a conference in Vegas with all the other technical experts in this industry, and all of a sudden Jeff Hicks realizes that every other VP is a PhD holder, and all of a sudden Jeff Hicks is feeling
less than. Yeah, we always measure ourselves versus others. I think that's inescapable. I don't, some people that's how they assign their value in life, and I have a healthy respect for that, and I think what certainly helps is along the way somebody's got to help us out, and so with some introspection, I've learned I've surrounded myself with a lot of good people, and so that I trust and respect and use the guidance and the information they've given me. And so it's helped me to achieve certain things that I sought that were goals that might have happened at the expense of everybody else. I mean, who cares about collateral damage? You know, this is the goal I'm seeking, and I have to achieve that no matter what. So I just feel that I've been blessed in a way that I've gotten this, support and guidance along the way that's stayed on a pretty good ascension for both my career path, but more importantly in my personal life. And so, yes, I can be very comfortable in a room of PhDs. I don't have to engage them in microbiology or anything. I can talk to them about fantasy football if I choose, right? Because that's what I can connect on, or humor. Just we all seem to bond to humor, and that's an easy way to connect with people. But it's kind of a curiosity. Tell me about that. Help me learn about. I guess it is what we learn after we know it all, and I want to stay open-minded. I guess that's the thing. I can be in situations that maybe are uncomfortable at first, or on a topic that I really don't agree with, or maybe even blatantly think is false. But just having that element of open-mindedness, I think that allows me to be in the scenario that you described, and somewhat fearful, but as long as you're willing to reach out and engage, I can connect on some level. It doesn't have to be at the PhD level.
Yes.
So I guess that's the approach I take. Is that...
Yeah, and again, I know you, so this is what I'm going to throw in, and this is the challenge that I was talking about.
Okay.
For the majority of people, that's not the case, myself included, because for the majority of people, an intimidating scenario like that automatically triggers their defensive self-construct, their ego, and that pops up, and it overgrows the superficial self-construct. So the appropriate behavior, or the appropriate way of carrying yourself in that scenario is trumped by this ego that or this defensive self-construct that is now trying to protect these frailties in your core, these insecurities. So there are a few words that you mentioned that I want to hone in on and use that as a segue to the final chapter that we're going to talk about, the self-awareness, the how. You talked about help. You talked about introspection, and you talked about support. These are powerful words that actually help you become more reconciled, become more... If I envisage these three constructs as somewhat of a scale, so on this side you have your superficial self, which faces the world, and then you have your core here, and somewhere in the middle of that scale, balancing both of this, is your defensive self-construct, your ego. It keeps everything in balance. Right. When all is well, we're good. When the core is tested and you're in that scenario, and your frailties are shining, your core then becomes fragile, and the ego grows to offset that and maintain the balance. Now, for somebody to be as reconciled as you are, there has to have been some work, so some self-awareness work. So whether it's meditation, whether it's self-awareness, doing some inner work to know yourself, because in the course that's what I try to bring out at the end. That chapter 6 is that work, that inner work that I think for the most part we don't tend to associate with our professional world or anything like that, but it's absolutely important to have that level of balance. I think, if I'm correct, that is what would give you the confidence to walk away from a deal and say, no, this is not the appropriate solution for this particular vendor, for this particular customer, and be okay with yourself walking away.
Yeah, I think, again, we all have mentors, guides for different aspects of our life, and I've tried to incorporate that as best I can, and with people with different backgrounds, with different skill sets, and so I guess I'm trying to think of a good example on when those frailties really came out, and it was probably most when I had a bit of a difficult medical diagnosis a few years back, and it's something I'm still battling and faced with today. And, at first it was like, I did play the why me. I'm doing good. I'm in good shape. I'm eating well. So, but, the defense mechanisms came up, and fear kind of trumps everything, because what's going to happen? I mean, the unknown is very unknown at this point. And so, by relying on people that are in similar situation, that are walking through it, it took the fear out of it. Certainly those things are there. There's moments that pops up, and those frailties are alive and well. But I look at the gifts and the things that I have around, be it in my work environment, in my family life, and just in the personal relationships I've built. And so I just feel like I'm carried by these mentors or these people that I've really sought out to trust in what they have to share with me and how to guide me, and not just what do we always do? Thanks for the advice. Yeah, it's just like we kick it off to the side. But try something different. Take a risk. We talk a lot about risk aversion.
Correct.
And so sometimes the people that are most successful in the buying roles you're talking about, they've done their homework. So it is truly a calculated risk. By this is out of the norm. This might not fit what the buyer or person before me or what our company or our business has always operated as, but I have the confidence to know, based on the information I have, this is ultimately going to be the best decision for our company and certainly me personally. So, it's just been a collection of insights and seeking more knowledge and information. I mean, I'm a simple guy. I don't try and come off as complex or overly intelligent, because I'm not. I mean, I've had to scrape to get through school at times, and through some of my own failings, but I know those are the behaviors that I've practiced and tried to utilize in my life, that just keep those frailties, again, I don't know if it's suppressed, but they're just not as prominent. They don't grip me and drive me the way they once did. And so there's more, I don't know, just more cerebral goals that I think I'm looking to follow and achieve.
I really like that, and I mean, we're friends, so how much I admire your inner strength, and I try to learn from the practices that I see you adopt, and some of those I've incorporated in this course. The building a stronger inner core that is closer to my outward projection, my superficial self-construct. And so I know what work goes into that, but something you said in your personal struggle, health and what have you, that struck me. It sounded like you've initially your instinctive reaction, and this is only natural, your instinctive reaction is fear of the unknown, what if, what could, and all of that. But I think what it sounds to me is like you then sort of collected your emotions and focused them toward objectivity. What are the facts of this situation? What are we dealing with here? What is the outcome, the possible outcomes? What are the possible outcomes? So I think in totality with this course, what we're trying to drive towards is getting to a point where we can make those decisions, those objective decisions. I think in your case, it's the ultimate. When you're talking about your personal health and things like that, I mean, the fear can just be overwhelming.
And again, you don't know where that person's coming from. Yes. I mean, that's on the other side of the table. And were they just the receiver of some bad or even tragic news, or what happened in the last meeting that they were in? So, and I think that's where gaining that trust, it kind of drops those defenses a little bit, and gives you that shared connection. So Yeah, again, like I say, I carry those, but they don't seem to be the driving factors. And what you were talking about there, it's what can I control and what
Yes.
can I not control.
Yes.
And so I can control my behavior, my health to a degree, and things that are in front of me. And we talk about what's the next best step to carry out, and I try and consciously look at that and determine what that is for me. And sometimes it doesn't always work in my favor.
Yes.
So we learn and we attempt it again. We don't condemn ourselves just because we made a mistake.
Yes.
So that's
That requires a great deal of humility within yourself, though. It requires a great deal of. I'm hearing you speak about humility. I'm hearing you speak about accepting the reality in front of you and making objective decisions based on the facts, as opposed to the impulsive, instinctive reactions that are within. Requires a lot of skill.
Yeah, and not to say that again. It doesn't have. I don't want to say anything's 100%, right?
Correct.
That's my goal starting out.
Yes.
But somebody comes in at a different angle, or they introduce something to the equation that's unplanned or unexpected, and I think that's where maybe there's a little pullback. And okay, wait a minute, this wasn't what I anticipated. But again, it's just. Let's seek the truth, like you said. Let's look at the facts about it. Is it kind of true? Is it? And sometimes I don't know well enough what it is, and that's when I need to seek that counsel and rely on those mentors. So stay open-minded, consult people you trust. Know that I don't. None of us know what the whole story looks like, and be prepared for things to change and change quickly sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, I really, really appreciate that, because I think those are really, really good words to keep in mind. I'll finish off real quick with just sort of a sort of scenario that I typically encounter in my work. Where we in government, we're dealing with we talked about the lack of a profit-making motive to sort of direct individuals towards a unified goal. So what tends to happen is individuals bring in their unconscious biases, and they're not aware of it. They're not aware of it. It's reflected in their buying habits. It's reflected in, when we talk about negotiations here, we're talking about negotiations at all levels. So not necessarily from a procurement standpoint. In fact, it could be a political negotiation. It could be a negotiation between an employee and a supervisor. Negotiating work circumstances and things like that. And a lot of times those emotional reactions play their way through in situations, and people are absolutely convinced that whatever unconscious bias that they are projecting that's coming through their feelings, and there's a tendency, there's a common theme where people say, trust your gut feelings, right? I tend to want to go against that. One of the most inspiring books that I've read recently, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and this is one of the points that's made in that book. Question your gut feelings, question your impulsive reactions, because don't underestimate the power of your unconscious mind. Subjectivity is a thing that is only noticed by the outsider. And so one of the things that I've learned from you, and we can close with this, because I think it'll be a nice way to close. Subjectivity is an internal thing. I think sometimes the problem with cognitive biases is we internalize and we're not aware of it. So projecting outwards, spending more of your time projecting positive attitudes towards other people, extending the hand and empathizing and looking at things from other people's perspective, actually in a sort of roundabout way helps you to get out of your biases and be more objective.
I think so. I mean, absolutely. I just take interest in somebody else. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I like conversation. I like talking with different people. As you know, we're going on a big trip to explore some countries we've never been to. I couldn't be more excited because I'm going to engage new cultures, people I've never met before, obviously. And, what am I going to learn? And so there might have been a time, I don't know, when money and career and, how do I get the bigger house? That was the main goal path. But now it's like, how do I expand my horizons? How do I just engage and maybe be, a benefit to somebody else rather than just being a taker as I was for a while. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And by taking interest in somebody else, that kind of minimizes those things, or at least doesn't make them as overt.
Yes.
And that I'm, inflicting my will on other people rather than maybe trying to share and understand more about them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. You heard the man. Take interest in other people, project outward, and keep an open mind. Right?
Very good.
Thank
Thomas,
you very much, Jeff.
I certainly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.